Welcome. It's really nice to have Colin and Miriam here. They're going to be talking about working with refugee families. So, to start us off, could you please share a little bit about your experience with refugee families? After all, they're people who are usually not strong in English, so that can be a challenge. How have you found it?
I would say we found the people we've met to be these really wonderful, generous people. They've had strong cultures of hospitality, perhaps few opportunities to offer that. So as we've accepted hospitality, it's provided a basis for a friendship. And there have been issues of English, but there's also just been issues of points of connection more generally, because our life experience is just so different from them. They have been through all sorts of troubles that we can only imagine what they've been going through.
Things that we sort of have, in common. So we have children. We love showing pictures of our children. That's a real point of contact. Talking about them, and we live in London, so showing pictures of places which are near us that they may have heard of. I think things like food. So we're always offered tea or coffee, and we enjoy doing that, so we can chat about it and appreciate the food that they have. Sometimes they have a different way of having sugar in drinks, so there's a lot of laughter very often. I think that's a thing that really breaks down barriers, is that we laugh and smile and enjoy company.
We do also make quite a lot of use of Google Translate
and pictures
and children who often have better English than their parents, so they're often the translators. And probably
let's go back. How useful do you find Google Translate, really?
Sometimes it can be quite useful. Sometimes you just have to laugh because it becomes clear when you type something in that the translation doesn't make sense the other way around. But as often as not, it's been useful.
Have you tried any other translation apps?
Not that I can remember to report on. No, mainly Google Translate.
So are you mainly dependent on a translation app, or do you muddle along in broken language?
So we don't use Google Translate a lot, so we're not trying to have a conversation in it, going backwards and forwards. We just kind of muddle through. Sometimes it's if you're trying to talk about something and you just can't find the word, sometimes just showing, finding a picture of that thing. So I don't know, maybe we were talking about a wardrobe. Well, that's a strange word, but when we showed a picture of it, now we know what we're talking about. We can now talk about how we can bring it in our car and where it will go, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So you've been visiting people in their homes. How are you able to do that? Why should they let you in?
The first reason is that the church that we were working with have had really good relationships with people in welcoming them into the town when they first arrived and giving practical help. So things like helping people get school places or just where to go and buy things. So there's like a store of goodwill there because they've seen practical help. So we're welcomed for that, and they've often just been treated kindly by people. So we can say, oh, we've come from this church, or so and so asked us to call in and see how you're doing, and oh yes, okay, that person, yes, well, please come in. So there's been a foundation of some kind of contact and relationship to form goodwill.
Good, thank you. That's very clear. So the people you visited, where were they from? What kind of countries?
Mainly Iran and Iraq, lots of them Kurdish, but some of them Persian, Iranians, but also Miriam's visited Albanian women, Kuwaiti women, and others as well.
There's been quite a group of Kurdish families from different countries, but with that common culture, and then a sprinkling of others that we've met. Yeah.
Okay, good, thank you. So what might happen on a typical visit?
Well, it's helpful to say how a so-called typical visit has evolved over time, actually. And it's evolved as a friendship and relationship has grown. So the first time we met, we were going to do a practical task, which might be filling in a form for a school place or something similar.
Registering with a dentist or something similar.
And we would, we'd inevitably be given water and tea and possibly something else even before we'd started. So there was a bit of relationship building, but there was a core task, which was the center of it. But at the end of the visit, even from the first visit, we made a point generally of trying to pray, at least offering to pray with the people we were supporting. So we've done this bit, but we believe it's helpful to ask God for something.
Yeah, or sometimes we just said, could we pray and ask God to bless your family as you're here?
And then we might have a few more contacts, which may be in the home or may have been somewhere else where we've met the people, and we would be invited for a meal. And a meal could often be 3 or 4 hours spending time in someone's home. So one of the things I was going to say earlier in terms of the English is one top tip is not to be afraid of silence, because there inevitably are points of silence where both sides are trying to think, okay, what can we talk about next that we can cope with our language? But it wasn't ever a problem. But anyway, as we'd have a meal, we would often find that people would share parts of their stories with us, which were quite harrowing, and actually they would share some of their deeper desires or deeper needs with us during the course of a meal with them. And so that led into more opportunities to pray. And sometimes these were sort of closer times of actually praying together. And we didn't plan this ever, but we found with 1 or 2 families, we ended up sitting around together, holding hands and praying. And we might do the majority of the praying, but they were involved in that sort of physical sense.
And the meals themselves sort of take much longer than typically we would spend eating a family meal, and quite a lot of pauses where we might be left on our own or with the kids while the adults went out and prepared the next thing that they were bringing, or maybe the father went to pray for 10 minutes while the wife made tea. So yeah, it's kind of longer and more relaxed and more pauses perhaps than we'd be expecting if someone came to our house for dinner. So just being ready for it to go with the flow and it to be a bit different. So it was always good when there were children there to play a game. Maybe there was a pack of cards, or sometimes we took Uno or something simple, or just looking at their school books. Sometimes they wanted to show us the book they had, and that was something we could do. We could read in English the story, and the parents appreciated that. But just kind of relaxing and spending a bit of time, not feeling that it was a rush thing, or we need to get this done and then we're going.
And you said you're invited to a meal. Did you always know it was going to be a meal, or sometimes we were invited and then found there was a meal?
Yeah, sometimes. There were times when someone would say, oh, we're just preparing dinner now, and we would have to say, we are so sorry, but we already have an appointment, but we would love to come another day. So if we had to sort of refuse something, we always could come another time. Sometimes people would say, oh, the meal is nearly ready, but actually you knew that the raw meat was still in the fridge. That was a cultural thing. But sometimes, well, we just waited and it was cooked for 3 hours.
Or sometimes we said, look, we've got to go off and do something else, but we'll come back. And we came back later, and the food was ready. And then more recently, it's evolved further, and actually as families have seen prayers answered, we've tried to take things a little bit further just to see who's interested and open, and we've actually said, could we share with you a story of Jesus? So we've typically done that after the meal, and the story of Jesus has led into further prayer.
Could you give an example of how you go about introducing a Bible story, and just describe a scenario of how that works? With Muslim families, they're not regularly having Bible stories. How does this? And it's not necessarily in fluent English, so
sometimes the story kind of arises naturally out of the conversation. So, for example, somebody may say, oh, why, you know, you're very kind, people in the church are very kind, why do you help people? And we might share the story of the Good Samaritan and say, well, let me tell you about a story that Jesus, the Messiah, or Isa al-Masih, we would say, let me tell you about a story he told, because that explains why we have this heart to help people. Or another time it might be something that a particular issue. So I can think of a time when somebody had hurt their leg, and at a cafe that the church runs, we had prayed for their leg. And when we went to visit this family, we said, oh, you know, how's your leg? And the lady said, oh, it's much better now. And then, you know, we might say, well, that reminds us of a story in the Gospels about Jesus and how he healed somebody's leg. And then we might tell a story that, so it might come up in conversation, but at other times,
I would say, yeah, sometimes it comes up in conversation, but more recently we've actually often gone with a story in mind, and we might pray a bit before we go, and what story might we be able to share. So families who've being granted their leave to remain in the UK, then have a very difficult transition month where lots of things have to happen rapidly, and it can be quite a difficult time. One of the stories we shared was the calming of the storm, where Jesus says, let's go over to the other side, but all sorts of storms come up in the middle. So we've thought of a story in advance that might link to their circumstances.
Another story that we did with a few families is the healing of blind Bartimaeus, because Jesus says to him, what do you want me to do for you? And so we've been able to then sort of turn that into, well, what would you like Jesus to do for you? So having established that, yes, we can share a story of Jesus, and once someone's had one story, the next time we offer, they're really keen because they enjoyed it. We usually tell the story. So we may have the Bible, our Bible, open carefully on our knee, not putting it on the floor, all that kind of stuff.
What, like a big black Bible that you've got with you, or?
We're not a big black one, but a nice looking Bible. So we wouldn't take a tatty one or a dog-eared one. So we do, you know, and we might have it open. So partly that's so that we can glance down and make sure we're not misremembering the story or telling something different, but also so that we're showing this is where it comes from. But we tend to tell it in a storytelling way. You know, a little bit dramatic, using our hands, maybe even acting it out. So getting one of the people, you know, if someone is a paralytic lying down, saying, oh, you come and lie down, and we can just see what happened. So we tell it in an interactive way in English, but on the way, we may have to get somebody, one of the children or someone who knows a little bit more English, to then interpret that as we're going, sort of a couple of sentences by sentence.
Yeah, and then we then we get it up on the screen on Bible Gateway and
on the phone.
On the phone in their language, say Sorani Kurdish or whatever it is, and I ask them to read it. And then we tell it back to each other. So we go around in a circle, and one person says one little bit, and then the next person says what's next, and we go around until we've finished the story.
So they have to remember the story. It's an exercise in them repeating it.
They are way better at us than remembering stories because they have oral culture. So they actually enjoy
and kind of correcting one another, especially children saying, oh, Dad, you forgot that this happened. And
that actually works very well. And then ask simple questions. What did you like about it? Give everyone who wants chance to share. What does this tell us about Jesus, or what does this tell us about God? And then that often leads on to things to pray for, or we can say, you know, what would you like us to pray for? So Bartimaeus is asked by Jesus, what would you like me to do for you? It's an obvious question to put for prayer at the end. So normally there's some sort of prayer according to the story, following on from the story at the end.
People like the stories because they may have characters in them that are familiar. So they've heard a little bit about Jesus, or, you know, if we've shared a story from other parts of the Bible, they've maybe heard of this prophet, but they're not absolutely clear on the story. They know there are stories about Jesus, but they don't know what they are. And so actually hearing one, and the culture is so much closer to the culture they've come from, that, you know, a little fishing boat being rowed across the lake is something that we don't see, but they've seen.
And their capacity to remember them is amazing. So actually, sometimes if we've shared 2 or 3 or more stories in one household before we share a new one, we might say, can you remember the previous ones? And actually, with remarkable accuracy, they can tell back the stories. And the children particularly like that. It's something that they can excel at, and they're brilliant at sharing them back.
Brilliant, thank you. Do you organise outings?
Yes.
Miriam's life would be dull if she didn't organise outings.
And I guess for me, the purpose of the outings is to take the relationship somewhere outside the home. So it's not always in their home. And it's to sort of strengthen relationships that are already there between the asylum seeker, refugee households and the church, the people who are involved there. So if I've done outings, I've asked 1 or 2 other ladies in the church to come. Sometimes it's just been to the park and we've had a picnic. Sometimes we've been in cars somewhere just outside the town to somewhere that they wouldn't normally go to, see something a bit interesting. Feel they're out of their normal situation. It can be quite pressured. You know, their lives are quite bounded because of their lack of resources, inability to travel. They don't have bus passes. So going somewhere different just sort of lifts the spirits and gets them out of their situation. So
and in the UK, of course, that they're not allowed to work until they've got through this preliminary stage, which can go on for 2 or 3 years. In some European countries that would be different, but so they're both men and women are largely stuck at home.
They're available. So Colin's done some.
And so with men, the outings I've organised, taking them out into the countryside, some could be a bit more active, climbing a hill or something, but quite a lot of them have rural origins, so actually they just like to be out of the town. And as you said, it's cultural for them to be out of the house for much of the day, but that when they're not allowed to work, they've got nothing much to do, and they don't really have any money or anywhere to go. But if somebody with a vehicle can take a group of them, well, they'll love to go out. So yeah.
And it's sort of a way of us offering hospitality as well. So we may not be able to invite people to our home, or we may not be in our home, as we weren't some of the time, but we can invite people out for a coffee, and that means a lot to people. To go to a nice cafe and have a drink and a cake is really special.
I remember one of the young Iranian lady who had student age, and some of the ladies from the church took her out to a cafe, and she broke down and said, I haven't been in a cafe like this for 3 years.
Yes.
And it's just an ordinary thing for everybody else, but it was really special for her because, it's too expensive as somebody with no money to do that. Just normal things.
We just recently, I had a little outing to a cafe, and actually the 3 ladies who came, the 3 Kurdish ladies, didn't have very much English. So we didn't have lots of conversation, but the feeling that we are joined together and enjoying something together. And for these ladies, they were doing something that other people in the society that's hosting them are doing. We're taking part in normal community activity of going out to a cafe. It meant a lot to them, even though there wasn't a lot of conversation building going on. So yeah.
Okay. And to what extent are you able to keep in touch with people between visits? You can't be there continuously, so with phone, WhatsApp, whatever, do you make use of that kind of thing much?
Miriam more than me, but then that's true in all of life, that Miriam does more WhatsApping than I do. So I'm fairly sparing with my WhatsApp. If somebody's on my heart and I'm praying for them, I will certainly let them know. But I make sparing use.
I make quite an extensive use, so I'm often sending photos to the ladies. At Christmas, I shared a little clip in their own language of the sort of the Jesus film or the Lumo Project films. Each week, a little part of the Christmas story, and people, did their heart emojis, or they liked it. And I often send greetings if it's Eid or if it's Easter or something. I just send little pictures or a message saying, "Oh, I'm thinking about you." So yeah, I tend to do that, and the ladies, some of them will send me messages back, particularly if there's something that's happened at, their children at school, they want to let me know, or something about their case. So yeah, keep in touch, which makes it easier than when we go and visit.
This isn't something we sort of talked about before. You've been doing visits as a couple, and for you that works well?
Yes, we've done both separate and together. And actually, I haven't really thought about this, but all of those work. So Miriam often visits the women on her own. I have visited men on their own. Sometimes we have cause to visit one of their families and only one of us can go, so only one of us does. But then it's also lovely to be able to go together as a couple, and particularly when you're visiting families, actually going as a couple, I think, goes down very well. So it's nice to have that flexibility to do all options.
And the families you've been going to, do they divide up their home with a men's section and a women's section?
It varies, I think. So often, yes, the women are in the kitchen, but we haven't had any separate ladies all meeting in this room and men in this room when we visited as a couple. Sometimes when I've visited, the ladies are all in the kitchen and maybe one or two men are in the living room, but I don't think that's it's not segregating according to sexes so much as we want to drink tea and chat. Why would we want to be talking politics with the men? So we haven't, it's not been segregated in the way that in some cultures it is.
So do you go and join them in the kitchen?
Oh yeah, I do. Yeah. One thing that we've really struggled to do though is to wash up for people, because that's not cultural at all. But we have in a couple of households been allowed to do that, and we've sometimes joked that, well, in our culture, if you cooked, then in our family the other person washes up, and so we've kind of had kind of jokes about that.
Yeah, we have fun pushing a few boundaries. My one victory was once I was allowed to dry up, and that was really quite a thing for a man to be allowed to do that. I haven't been allowed to do it again in that household.
Probably the husband isn't allowed to either.
No.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. One of the things that struck me from the beginning as you're talking about it is enjoyment. You do enjoy your visits, don't you? And
we love them. Yeah, we do. And
I think anyone who's going into this kind of ministry with a sense of, oh, this is what I've got to do, a strong sense of it's a duty, it's a chore, I've got to visit a lot, it's not going to work the same way, is it?
No, I think it's fine to feel a little bit scared though, or I'm not quite sure how will it be because I don't speak much English. I mean, I don't speak much of their language, or how will it be, because maybe we'll eat differently. But I think the thing is to have an open heart, that we're going because we love these people with the love of Jesus. And, he will show his love to them, and we can kind of join in with that.
We managed to have a lot of laughs despite the language limitations. So somehow,
sign language, and
even in the lack of communication, you can find fun in the lack of it. But we do manage to laugh quite a lot, and it's great fun.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. That's a great note to finish on.